commercial break. When we come back, I introduce my guests. You're welcome back. I have it to my immediate left. Mr. Farouk Eliasso is the head of Multikids Africa. He is a UK-trained educationist with over 20 years of experience and 7 years working as a teacher's trainer. Previously, he worked with the University of Professional Studies in Accra as a quality assurance coordinator and later as a faculty officer for banking and finance. He currently heads Multikids Africa, providing inclusive education across Ghana and Africa. Sir, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
He's ably accompanied by Mrs. Mandy Budge, founder and CEO of Multikids Africa. She first came to Ghana in 1989 as a trumpet player who was working with a high life band in London. Mandy has worked as a special education teacher for 18 years, and she did so in the UK. She co-founded Multikids Inclusive Academy in 2010. Mandy is dedicated to and has a passion for inclusive education for all. Ma'am, you're welcome.
Thank you.
And then a gentleman who is no stranger to your screens, an author, a columnist, a lecturer, and a leadership coach and a trainer for teachers, Mr. Anis Hafar. Sir, you're welcome.
Pleasure.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're welcome to the studios. Anis, I'll start with you. You've done quite a bit of work when it comes to higher education. Does it strike you when there is seclusion at the very low levels of our education because of disability and other, challenges?
Good. Now, that's a good topic, and I'm glad we are discussing it, especially inclusive education. Now, it's really a wide arena. Handicapped people are involved in some way, and I don't think we've made enough allowances for them. I remember when I was in secondary school, not in Kumasi, Cape Coast and Fansfim, we had people who had polio, and you could see them struggling going up the hill to the classrooms and so on. But one of them ended up with a PhD from University of Science and Technology. So we need to make allowances for those people. So that's one aspect of it. And then, of course, we want to look at those who are blind or who are visually impaired. We want to look at those who can hear well and that sort of thing. That's one aspect of inclusion. But there's, when you look at a spectrum of the demographics of people who are typical in education, it's like a bell-shaped curve. I mean, on one extreme are the people that we're talking about, various kinds of disabilities. On the other extreme are also exceptional people who don't have the means to excel because they are all mainstreamed. The reason why I'm saying that is that, again, that's also inclusive education. I don't know if that's what you want to discuss, but also it's very important. There are a lot of very sharp people, or people that I call uncommon thinkers, who find it very difficult to be in a traditional Ghana African setup, because you don't make allowances for their genius to show. Again, I'm talking about this based on a project that I used to do in the US called the Gifted and Talented Education, where we made special allowances for those people. And then the state that I was in, the state of California, was very concerned that we are not going to raise everybody the same way, because in the US the states compete to one another. So at the time that I was there, I think it was just California and New York that had what we call gifted programs. So when we talk about inclusion, we need to also look at that segment. I'm very concerned about that, because in the work that I do, I'm always also looking at people who are exceptional and what it is that we can do to help them, because they can't be mainstreamed all the time. So, I guess this would be a good introduction.
Yeah, that was a good preamble. I think we'll come back to Anis. Budge, or Madi, I should call it. Mandy, I should call it. We look up to the United Kingdom, and your educational system has had a lot of impact on our educational system here in Ghana, because we were colonized by Great Britain, of course. At what point in the 19th century or the 20th century did the UK find it necessary to make room for people with, special needs in terms of education?
Well, you'd be surprised how recent it is. I mean, children who have special educational needs or disability are marginalised throughout the world. And I would say I moved back to Ghana in 2009, and the school that I had been working in, which was a special school, was only just becoming inclusive at that point. So you would only really see the vision of inclusion where you might have a big compound with kids who are typical kids, and probably including those ones who are gifted and talented, by the way, all in together. And then you'd have the kids who have got disability or special needs, usually in a different room, different school with different head. So it's not really all in one campus. They share the playground, they share the entrance, but apart from that, it's still quite separate. So I think it's still really recent. There are some countries in the world, and parts of Canada are very inclusive, and but the UK is still really behind, I would say, in terms of the whole world.
If I may add, we had visitors from the UK who came to Multi-Case Inclusive Academy to, if you like, teach us how to be inclusive. Obviously, when they came after 2 days, they realized that we had to come and teach them instead, because they are not as up to the level where Multi-Case Inclusive Academy is.
Really? We are doing better than countries in the first world?
In terms of inclusion.
Well,
not
no,
all over the world.
I mean, we are talking about Multi-Case.
I'm talking about Multi-Case. I'm not talking about the country as a whole.
So
Multi-Case in particular, the model that Multi-Case has was virtually, that is what that school in UK wants to get to. They are not inclusive, they are integrated, and there's a difference between the two.
Okay, I think there will be an opportunity to go further. But Anis, you grew up here in Ghana, even though you have dual citizenship. There are cultures in Ghana that call for infanticide or fratricide. When kids are born with deficiencies, there's consensus within families that they should be taken back. Euphemistically, they should be killed or injected to die. How much of a progress have we made on that cultural front to appreciate disability?
It's only been recently that we've been bold enough to recognize these traditional practices that you're talking about. But now there are organizations here in this country that are really addressing that, especially people whose children fall into that category where they may have been killed earlier on in traditional practices. But these are modern parents. They want their children with them, even though they have these kind of handicaps. But this is something that we have to begin to now understand in terms of some cultural practices. And I remember I was on a particular program that was gory in terms, have you heard that before?
You're going to banish.
Yekuchen is right. So what they would do is that they take them somewhere, very similar to Chinua Achebe's book, Things Fall Apart. Those practices go that far back. And to describe the way in which the children are killed, and there are people who have expertise in that sort of thing. And also now, even if you look at people who have cerebral palsy or Down syndrome, traditionally, as soon as that happens, we bring in also the elements of witchcraft. That is some grandmother, old woman somewhere who's inciting the birth of such children and so on. And even parts in the north too, I believe, or where when the children are born, the mother has a child, the child dies, they are born again, and they're dead another time. So the next time around, they make scars on their faces, so that if they appear again, they might want to know. What I'm saying is this: we need to now be a little more scientific in terms of recognizing that deformities are natural, especially when you begin to see even Siamese twins that are joined in the head, they're joined in the back, and they are these things. And we need to recognize that. But you know, the United Nations is helping us quite a bit in terms of getting us to appreciate the differences in human beings and also some of the things that can happen that to give birth to children who are not normal per se. And I think UNICEF is also quite influential in that. So what they've been told is what they call the 3 Ps: the right of protection for such children, the right of provision for those children, and even the right of participation. I think that's what we're talking about. Because now, frankly, if you look at the public schools, for example, even those who are regular have difficulties adjusting, especially where there are no toilets, where people, the schools sit in dust and so on. So they are very serious things, even with so-called normal children. So now when you bring in the element of those who are outside the curve, then that becomes something that we need to look at. But now you realize that now when new buildings are set up, allowances are made, especially those who might be in a wheelchair, or allowances are made in particular toilets where young people need, people with disabilities have to have handles and so on. So that progress is being made. But I'll tell you though, when I was in the School of Education in the US, one of the first things that they did for us as student teachers was to take us around to look at children with severe handicaps. And some of these severe handicaps are children where if you don't feed them, they will die. And I saw that, I couldn't believe it. And then the commitment of the people who are taking care of these children. In other words, even as you feed them, they spit it out. So you have to have a spoon to scoop it and put it back in. And then there are also schools for moderate types of retardation, where people can only take 1 instruction at a time. You can't give them 2, 3 instructions. For example, you can't ask them to go to the door, 1 instruction, open it, another instruction, turn left, another instruction, and so on. They don't have the capacity to handle that. So the first you do is teach them, go to the door first. And you want to make sure that that task is completed. Then open the door and so on. But what the Americans have done is that they have companies that are able to absorb those young people to do repetitive type activities so that they are mainstreamed. And then of course they also taught how to get on the bus, So these things are new coming to us, that we have to be willing to accept. That we are not all endowed the same way. There are some who have disabilities.
Monday, we'll go into the nitty-gritty of what Multi-Kids Africa does. Anis has painted quite a gloomy picture. Families feel ashamed when their babies are born innately with these disabilities. Do you have a psychologist that takes parents through some kind of orientation to accept the reality?
There's lots of things that I'd like to respond to. Yes, we do. You need what we call a multiple disciplinary team. So the psychologist plays a role in assessments. And then you need speech and language therapy for children who can't process more than 1 or 2 instructions, like what you were explaining just now about going to the door, opening the door. And that may not be necessarily to do with lack of intelligence. That may just be to do with a language processing challenge. So there's so many different layers and layers and layers of children and challenges and disability. Occupational therapists are also key, helping children focus, maybe helping them to write, be independent, like do up their buttons or pull up their trousers. So that's a team, physiotherapists who work a lot with children with cerebral palsy. Without a physiotherapist, a child with cerebral palsy may never be able to achieve their potential. So it's really key, and it's in our education policy, our inclusive education policy, that we need an MDT to make inclusive education happen. And just, if I might just chip in a little bit about, we do have a very strong relationship with children with cerebral palsy and Multi-Kids through the Special Mothers Project, which is an advocacy group for caregivers and parents of children with cerebral palsy. And there are people on the group who have killed their children or have been pushed into a situation where they've been advised to kill their child. And, you know, it happens through, in a way, slow poisoning.
Wow.
It's a herbal concoction. So I think it's really key to look at what's behind the moment when those children are, you know, are killed.
Yeah.
And the pressure is so huge on families who have children with high needs, really huge. I mean, they're isolated, pushed out, families don't want the child, they tell the mothers to kill their children, and they, you know, so it's really a big issue still today. It's not, you know, we were in the, a child was in, we have a free clinic every Wednesday called our community clinic, and there was a child in the midst of our clinic who was taken to the north, and he was killed.
Gosh.
And Farouk, he was near his village. He tried to stop it. You know, it was really shattering when it happened because this child was coming to our clinic, and it's heartbreaking because these children are seen as snakes, and that's the common way that we see a child with cerebral palsy. But the amazing thing is that, like in multi-kids, we do have those children with profound and multiple learning difficulties who can't feed themselves, who can only eye point, so they can't use any of their other limbs. But we have also children with cerebral palsy who are extremely functional. And right now we have one young man who's taking his IGCSE and ICT, and he has cerebral palsy. You know, and incredible determination and focus, and very able, because another point also, just to bring up what you said about getting to something which is more scientific about why these children are born. You know, a child with cerebral palsy, there's really clear reasons why they have cerebral palsy. It's usually starvation of oxygen to the brain. It could be that the mother had cerebral malaria during pregnancy. And a really common thing in Ghana, which is totally preventable, is that the child is born with jaundice. And because we don't put the child under the blue light, the jaundice goes into, so we wrap children until they're, you know, till the outdooring ceremony, and then when you take off the cloth, they're yellow. The jaundice has gone into the brain and caused cerebral palsy. And when Dr. Bailey very first told me this in the Inclusive Education Forum in 2009, I was absolutely stunned. And there were so many, when I asked mothers what happened, that's often the case. It's to do with that.
Farouk,
yes.
Quite a descriptive and poignant, you know, anecdote from Monday. Sorry about the little child who was, killed. Is there legislation in Ghana? Anis talked about the 3 Ps. The first is protection. Is there legislation to criminalize killing these children, innocent children? And are there punitive measures in our criminal code?
Well, yes. I mean, we've got so many legislation, which both national and international, for the protection. We've got the Children Protection Act, which protects our children. Unfortunately, our traditions do not allow us, our culture does not allow us to go and report. So, for example, if I know Anis has killed his son, when I go and report, who am I reporting to? I'm reporting to the village chief. The village chief is part of the problem because he wants to perpetuate that practice. Because that practice, if that is not perpetuated, it means that the person, that child who was born with a disability, is a curse on the village, it's a curse to the family, it's a curse on the community. So who are you going to report to? I mean, when this child's case came up, I had to call the police, the MP, and eventually go to the chief. And I spoke to people around the chief, but it didn't happen. Eventually the boy was killed. So we don't have serious punitive measures in place. Now they are in place, but of course they're on paper. When it comes to implementing those punitive actions, it doesn't happen because our communities, the relationship between our communities overcomes that that criminal deed that has taken place, if it makes sense. So yes, the laws are there. Are the laws protecting the children to a very large extent? Yes, but some people go through the loopholes. And therefore we have to be able to sensitize those people in the villages and educate them to understand that people with disabilities can contribute to society if they are given the necessary support and interventions, because they are not hopeless people. They, just like Aziz said, one of them, Polo, went up to get a degree in KU. They are capable only if they are able to provide them with the necessary support and interventions to make them achieve.
Anis, what role does civil society and also advocacy, what role can it play in taking away the stigma that is associated with these disabilities?
I mean, a program like what it is that you're doing, and also there has to be a national effort. You know, many times when we look at the amount of money that we spend on politics, sometimes I wonder if we can spend half of it, you know, to raise consciousness about raising young people, including children who are in that particular situation. You know, but the other thing is this: there's also the element of economics in it. Like I was telling you, when I was trained to be a teacher, and I went to these facilities, they are very expensive facilities to put together. You know, especially the kind of expertise you're talking about, the kinds of expertise to begin to identify the problems. Look at psychologists who might be able to handle these things, and also have doctors who specialize. You know, again, it's not anybody from the street who can handle a case like that. The training itself is also different. And then you look at the equipment that we need. If you look at the people who have to be trained to do these kinds of things, the nature of even the architecture of buildings where we take care of these particular young people, and then you realize that it will be very difficult for Ghana now, considering even the nature of our public schools, to make allowances. I mean, if you go to our public schools, I mean, the school that I went to in the elementary school in the village in Obuasi, before Ghana's independence, there was no toilet there. You go there today, there's no toilet. Even the secondary school that I went, not the secondary school, excuse me, the primary school that I went to in Kumasi, you know, on the Roman Hill, St. Peter's. That time, we didn't have any toilets. We still don't. If you look at the environment there, ECM, ASIM, Government Boys School, St. Joseph's, Methodist Boys Schools, you know, these are the real challenges. In fact, about 6 months ago, I made a little tour of the schools to see, even for those who are healthy, so to speak, the toilet facilities. And since there were no people to clean them up, they blocked it. They've cut branches from trees to block the entrance. So the question is this: even for regular people, from being in school from 8 to 3 o'clock, where we have to respond to human needs, what do we do? And then the question is this: even the parents, and again, you want to even look at teenagers, girls who are in a period. What are they supposed to do? You know, so we have a very large problem that is poverty driven in many cases. But then, are we concerned enough? That is the issue. You know, because life is tough for even people without disabilities. So if you add disability to it, then it's what I call a double jeopardy.
And it's the former government that just lost power about 2 years ago, appointed a blind minister. Would you say we are making progress?
Of course. I mean, again, we also want to look at appointing people on merit. You know, you don't.
So we don't pity people because of disability. We should appoint them because they are competent and have the credentials.
It's the worst thing that you can do. Let me give one instance. I taught reading many years back, and there was one girl who couldn't see well, visually impaired, but was mainstream in a regular class. When I realized that I had an emotional, how do you call it? I gave her particular privileges because I could feel her pain. The mother came for a conference one day, and what she told me was this: I don't want you to pity my daughter, because when she goes into the real world, nobody is going to pity her. So have her adapt to the same standards that you apply to other kids. That was an eye-opener for me, you know. But then human beings says that many times we can live up to expectations, you know. And then I then began, for the first time, realized that I needed to treat her normally, you know. So these are the things that we have to begin to look at. And again, we have to also learn to conscientize people. It takes a lot of patience. It takes a lot of understanding. It takes a lot of ability to know how to raise young people. But in this country, we find it very difficult to raise people, period. You know, I was at a program that I did with Ghana National Association of Private Schools in Kumasi to promote a reading culture. And then what I said is this: let's look at our own culture. Where someone dies, the first week, there's noise all the way through the weekends. We block streets and so on, and the noise alone. And then the funeral proper will last maybe another 3 or 4 days. So if you live in a compound house, where do you sit quietly to even read a book? So these are the larger questions,
Okay.
And in a way, as far as I'm concerned, unless we pay particular attention to the way we raise children, then we are all disabled in some fashion.
Okay.
These are the larger questions that have to be addressed.
Mandy, it will interest you to know that when you go to the Accra Regional Hospital, Ridge Hospital, and our National Hospital, Kolebo Hospital, the elevators have cripples because they are not too mobile. They regulate the elevators, so it's a source of employment for people. At Multi-Kids Africa, do you consider such children with disabilities less of intelligent kids? Do they play second fiddle, or we should let them go through the same rigorous, educational curricula we give regular children?
Okay, let me just give you a correction.
Yeah.
The school is called Multi-Kids Inclusive Academy. Okay, and I'm the head of the school, I'm the founder of the school. And Farouk heads up a program called Multi-Kids Africa.
Okay.
Just training.
It's come out of the school, just for clarity. I think, it's all about, yes, giving children opportunities, but in order to achieve inclusion, achieving equal opportunity, different kids need different support. So yes, it's not about treating them differently or with pity, it's about giving them the tools they need to have an equal opportunity to achieve the person who doesn't need those tools. So for example, in Multi-Kids, we may have a hearing impaired child in a class with hearing children, and one has a cochlear implant, one has a hearing aid. So 2 different reasons why those children are able to hear. And we have a teacher who's trained at UEW, who's a hearing impaired teacher. She's works specifically with those 2 children. But if she's in that class without a teacher who can hear and sign, then she's also isolated to some extent. This is where it gets expensive. Now you're looking at having 2 teachers, employing 2 teachers instead of 1, because you want to empower the deaf teacher, the hearing impaired teacher. You need the hearing impaired teacher to really get the signing going, not only for the children who are hearing impaired, but everybody learns to sign. So then the kids start communicating, then you start seeing inclusion happening. So it's, we call it differentiation in the business. You have to differentiate the curriculum, and that means putting certain things in place to enable a child with a disability to achieve their best. And I mean, right now, I think we just have to open our minds up here with these kids. When we have a young woman in our school who has autism, she doesn't speak or write. We were able to, through cooperation with her family and through being open-minded school, find a way for her to start communicating through using this abacus. It's called RPM, Rapid Prompting Method, which she's eventually able to put onto a laptop. She doesn't have the ability to press really hard, but she can touch screen on an iPad, right? She's topping a class with mainstream kids in science and maths. Now, that can blow your mind. How is that possible? This child doesn't write or speak, but she's topping the class because we've given her the tools, the ability, the way for her to actually start showing the world that she's extremely able. She can think, and she hasn't even been through formal education, so where did she get all the knowledge from? And that's another thing, autism's another whole thing as well. The way that is we probably all know a little bit about autism, but you have got the ability with the autistic mind to really become excellent in usually one field, one area. So yeah, I just think it's something we've got to start thinking about in a completely different way. And one of the original questions about how do we really sensitize people, how do we start changing people's minds, and we found in the school that these kind of stories and these kind of experiences, the typical kids, who we call typical, the ones who don't have any specific, just regular kids. All kids have something that they're not so good at, but they haven't got a learning disability or a special need or a physical disability. They'll go home and tell their parents about this, and then their parents will start thinking, they're obviously already open-minded parents to send typical kids to our school, right? But then they start saying, wow, that's amazing. And then they'll start telling their friends. And so it goes like that. And I think also we have families. So one child who's special needs and then the sibling who isn't. And that also starts changing the world a bit because they're not away from the world.
Okay.
You know, they're included.
Okay. And Farouk, you are from the northern part of this country, which is largely arid and impoverished. There are schools under trees and kids have to travel miles to access education. Will the kind of educational services you provide at MultiKids not be too expensive for regular Ghanaian families with such kids?
Good point. I mean, it's very expensive because first of all, like Mandy was saying, in some classes, we have some classes in MultiKids Inclusive Academy where you have 4 students and 2 teachers and 1 teaching assistant. So that's 3 members of staff in 1 classroom. That's very expensive. That is in addition to whatever services the multidisciplinary team will give them, the psychologists, the occupational therapists, the speech therapists will provide. So it's very expensive. We have a dream that we want to be able to put a MultiKids Inclusive Academy in every region in the country. That's a dream. But even if you're not able to achieve that, we should be able to find ways of getting government really involved. I mean, Andy said earlier on that we waste so much money, extremely, I mean, so many examples I can give, that if we take half of that, we could fund a lot of students who will go into mainstream schools, inclusive schools, and perform very well. In MultiKids Inclusive Academy, for example, there's about 29% of the students are subsidized, fees subsidized.
Where does the funding come from?
Well, it's from ourselves. And I think maybe I should let Mandy explain that point because she deals with the. I mean, now we form the committee and all that to make sure that we're able to fund people who really deserve it.
We're committed to the community.
Yeah.
You know, you can't have a school like ours and have families coming in and they don't have money for school fees, but they have really compelling situations. Because inclusion also means including all children, not just the ones who can pay. So that brings up that whole question, how do you make it work? And some people have got money to pay school fees and some people haven't. So we set a foundation up to try and, you know, to try and support these families. The school took on the burden to start with, but slowly it's becoming heavy for the school. And, you know, our teachers are all committed. We don't pay people as well as maybe other schools could. But actually that community that we've created is also really inclusive. We may have a mother who's selling on the street, or a Makola woman, or, you know, and then we have someone working with the embassy, or it's really mixed up.
Okay.
But the key here, I think, like I said earlier, is the funding.
And the commitment to
the
having
commitment to our people. You see, we have now said free SHS. So one, access is very difficult to that SHS, and 2, even when they access, are they learning? Have they got the qualified teachers to provide them with the learning, teaching the learning? Have they got the psychologists to make sure that the interventions are in place for them to learn? So you've given free SHS, which is a laudable thing. However, by providing the free SHS, you have marginalized more people, because the people who have got disabilities are supposed to be in school, but they are not in school because they cannot cater for them. So where do we go from here? The government has to put funding in there, be committed, as they said in their manifesto, to commit themselves. And when they say commit, when we say commit, we mean provide the necessary resources to ensure that what you said in the manifesto will be implemented, and that means funding money.
Anis, you've done quite a bit of consulting for the Ghana Education Service. Would you advocate for a public-private partnership to cater for some of the needs Farouk and Mandy are talking about?
You know, that is the wave of the future. What they call PPP, public-private partnerships. That's the wave of the future. It's, again, you know, we also have to be realistic. That if you look at the situation on the ground, even in terms of public schools alone, and the difficulties that regular people encounter, I'll be honest with you, people might not ignore that responsibility and say that we're going to put in more money for people with disabilities. So public-private partnership is very important, especially, again, for you, now we have to begin to look at corporate social responsibility, so that we look at other sources of funding besides government, you know. I don't think that we have narrowed our search to particular organizations that will help. Many times what I keep saying is that the government can only do so much, especially now that we have the free senior high school. That in itself is a very cumbersome,
huge burden,
responsibility, So I'm really enjoying talking with you, especially the commitment and the passion that they have for those kinds of children, and we need more of that, because I'll be honest with you, it's not everyone who has the emotional capacity to handle children like that. Even their own parents might not even have it. But then many times you always realize that it becomes an outside source that begins to take responsibility for these children. But then, I think corporate society has to get involved now, because I think they are in a position to help, and they should be able to do so.
So how do we do that? Through writing proposals, doing programs, arts and entertainment programs, inviting executives of companies to come and witness what these kids can do. How do we do that?
I think so.
When especially the media has no space.
Okay, Frank, it would be good to hear from you in terms of how you raise sources of funds for.
When we were talking just then, I was thinking about the importance of changing the perception of schools which are inclusive or could be inclusive, as an ideal school. We're trying to create, not really a model, but we're trying to pioneer an approach to inclusion. And if you come into MultiKids, you'll notice that everybody's really happy, the energy's up, because when you've got typical kids, the energy's higher. Children with special needs tend to think slow, move slower, and sometimes, so you get that kind of down feeling, but when you get the up feeling, it really feels different. And I think we need to change the interest in it, so it stops being pitiful. So years ago, I got TV3 to do a program about two organisations, our organisation, another organisation that we work with, and they precluded the whole preview or whatever it's called, just before the program started, the whole thing was showing one of their old clips of this child who'd been abandoned with special needs, eating out of a plate on the floor with a cat. And I probably shouldn't have mentioned TV3. Any program, any TV company could have done it at that point. But that's what we always think of. We think of poor, we think of... there is a compelling relationship between poverty and disability. It doesn't have to be depressing. It can be amazing. And what we want to know is we want to see the amazingness. And then people will start getting more interested. The British Council currently have 2 of our students doing an internship every week on Thursday. And they're blown away by these kids. They don't even realise that these kids could really do so much and are so entertaining and so interesting and etc.
So would you need to do more outreach to change perceptions? Ghana in fact has got a National Football Federation for people with disabilities.
Yes.
So are we doing great?
Are you talking about football?
Yeah, when was the last time?
Why not?
When was the last time you went on a tournament?
And not with football, generally. Mandy talked about changing perceptions. Are we doing well? If we could actually create a federation for people with...
Look at the Paralympics.
Yes.
And we've got a good Ghana team.
Yes, we've got a very good Ghana team. We've got a very good Ghana football team. In fact, one of the footballers came to speak to our students. And one of the questions they asked him was, so how do you do this? How do you do that? And he was telling them how difficult it was for them because of lack of funding to be able to compete and have a sort of league where they would be able to prepare themselves effectively and efficiently to go and compete outside the country. So that's all there. So it's very. I think that programs like these, when companies begin to use their CSRs much better in terms of prioritizing education for people with disabilities, because when we see their output, when you see somebody with that disability who comes into your school, like what managers gave, and you see from the time the person comes in and after 3 months you see the progress that person has made, you begin to believe that we call them these people, right? These people can also achieve, and be productive and contribute to society.
Right.
But we always stop them because we always sympathize with them as opposed to empathizing with them. I mean, one of the students, we had a student who came to me one day and said, he feels he has a lot of sympathy for one of the students. And I said, wow, really? Why? That student has a driver. So why do you have sympathy for him? You don't have a car. he has a driver. And you're having sympathizing with him. He is given the opportunity. He will be as good as anybody that you are teaching.
Okay. The point I wanted to raise, I think Mandy made mention of that, is to help them to build their confidence.
Yeah.
That you are okay.
Yeah.
You know, we accept you the way you are. We are looking at you as a fully fledged human being. And there are programs that I have, or even with CTFM, where we have a literacy challenge. I mean, where we bring them in as dancers. You know the Horizon. This is good. Right, we bring young people there.
They're amazing dancers there.
Right, to dance and so on, build their esteem, and help them to build their confidence that they have something the society can benefit from. You know, so don't look at yourself as an outcast per se. You know, there was another program that I had to where, again, they've tried hard to mainstream quite a few of them in particular kinds of roles and so on. So it's really interesting where, again, they don't want, I mean, it comes to a point where you don't want them grouped as a homogeneous group. Sometimes you need to extend them into regular settings so that they can be at par as much as possible with others.
How would perceptions change overnight when the people who beg on the streets are usually these kinds of kids? Should it be government policy to take these kids out of the streets to begin with, so that the good examples we want to see and the gloomy picture that was created by a certain TV channel as Mandy, these are the things we'd see outside? Where do we start?
But I'll tell you this. Again, there are some cultural practices that have to stop. There was a book that was written about taking care of Ghanaian children, and that segment, including the segment of young people who are in the streets. But you'll be surprised that there were times where these kids were maimed deliberately so that they will look hideous and pitiful enough to be used for begging. I read it and I couldn't believe it. So what I'm saying, and it sometimes becomes a full-time job for the parents to engage in that kind of activity so they themselves can be beggars in the process. So this has to be addressed. But you know, once I was in Rome for a meeting, and then when we went out for lunch, I realized that there was nobody on the street. No children on the street. Not regular children, not children with handicaps and so on. So I asked the person also, where are the kids? He said they are in school. But in school also includes those children who ordinarily were begging on the streets here in Ghana. You know. So again, we have to be conscious enough and be modern. Like going to the 21st century, there are particular social systems primitive social systems that we have to get rid of. You know, that exposure. But you know, frankly, I have not seen, to be honest with you, I mean, when Ghana became independent, I was 10 years old. You know, I was in elementary school. I have not seen a consistent government effort to address these issues on a scale in which it has to be done. You know, we tend to pretend that these things are not there. These kinds of social ills are not there or perpetuated in some way. But again, with programs like this and the kinds of work that you do and so on, we have to come to that realization that it's not acceptable. And frankly, for me, it's even a larger picture than that. When I see young little kids selling sachet water, crisscrossing the streets, cars driving at 40, 50, 60 miles per hour, it's not normal. It's not normal under any circumstances, and it should stop. But guess what? We accept it as normal. And the people who are entrusted in particular positions to make sure that these things do not happen, I mean, they are in nice cars, the tinted
Rolled
windows,
up the glasses.
the air conditions are on and so on, and that is a part that we really have to work with. Again, religious organizations too have to come in, but now it's become a money matter for them too. But it has to be, how do we pretend to be Christians and not know how to take care of the weakest elements in society? What I keep saying is this: for us to know where we are going in the future, we should see how we treat the weakest elements in society. So this debate has to continue, or these discussions have to continue.
One thing in.
Please
just
do.
a little story about opportunity. The guys on the street, right? The ones on the trolley by Nan's apartment there. So one day, one of those guys came to tell somebody that they wanted to have their own tuk-tuk. Those little motorized taxis, and they bought him a brand new yellow tuk-tuk, and today he runs a thriving business.
Yes.
So he came to our school. He also makes jewellery and all sorts of things. He came to tell his story because we always try to encourage advocacy and encourage people. I mean, that's an amazing story. Just a very simple story. So now he's training other people on the trolleys and helping them. He just needed an opportunity. Somebody said, right, I will buy you one.
That's all. That's it.
That was all. Brand new one. And he's proud of it, and he's amazing. And some visitors to Ghana, they used to use him all the time.
So it's his own business now.
Yeah.
Okay. Our viewers at home can join the conversation now. You can call us on our phone numbers that will shortly be boldly displayed on your screens. Anis took the wind out of my sails. I wanted to ask, where would you situate religion in the whole of this? Do you have devotion for the kids? What role can the church and the mosque play in building up their confidence, so to speak?
I think that for every kid, not necessarily a child with learning disabilities or a child with any physical disabilities, all the stakeholders must be involved. All the stakeholders of education must be involved. So we are talking about parents. I mean, you won't believe how important parents are and siblings are to ensuring that students achieve, especially the students who have disabilities. They're very, very key. Now, religion, it can go to the left, it can go to the right. It can be positive or it can be negative, depending on the beliefs of the parents in particular. Where the religious bodies have to come together and say is this: that when you are born with a disability, you are not born with a bad spirit. When you have a child with disability, you take the child straight to the pastor, and the pastor dumps the child in the forest where they are praying for him or her for the spirits to get out of his body. Now, if you, the pastor, who is supposed to have so much authority, not only authority, but you have got spiritual authority, you can predict what is going to happen to you, then you are finished, because the pastor has got that hold over you. The pastor is the other side of the coin, where the pastor says that no, it is not the spirit who is your son. Your son has a disability. With the necessary support and necessary interventions, he will be able to achieve, and refer him to the right authority, not start praying that the devil must get out of him. So it cuts both ways. Those religious people themselves need to be educated. If you go to the villages, who are the religious people in the village? They are the imams or the pastors. What education have they got? What do you know about people with disabilities? Indeed, what do you know about inclusion? What do you know about education? And therefore, they are still stuck in the traditional methods. The way the Muslim will practice the religion in the north is different from the way the Muslim practice here. There are variations. The belief systems are interpreted differently. So back at home, back in the north, they interpret it and mix it with traditional beliefs and say you have to go, because if you don't go, if you're not killed, you keep recurring. Just like we need to find out that you don't come back after death to come and be a burden on the family. So both sides work. We need to start educating them to make sure that.
Anis, there's a caller on the line. Hello, good evening. Thanks for making time. Hello. Oh, sorry, your line dropped. Anis, in churches, the best miracles are those in which a pastor recites incantations and orders the cripple to get out of the wheelchair. So, can we make any progress? Anis.
Yeah, some more. You know, once I was at a Senate hospital at Osu, and they had just brought in this person who was suffering from a heart attack, and they wheeled him in, and there was a nurse who was trying to pump the chest in some way for this guy to breathe, and it was a lost case. But they deposited him right below a television, and you know what was shown on television? There was a religious ceremony going on. A pastor who was dressed in a red hat, a red shirt and a red jacket, red trousers and red shoes, and he had called this little person and said, look, I know who has been troubling you. I know why you are not progressing in the world. It's your grandmother. Your grandmother has put a cobra inside your head. That is why you are not progressing. And this is in the hospital. So the first thing that comes to my mind is this: my goodness. I mean, here we are, someone who suffered from a heart attack, and we know the causes of the possibilities of heart attack happening to anybody. So why don't you do programs as far as exercising, eating the right kinds of food, reducing salt intake and so on? Why do we do that even in the hospital? I mean, we are really oriented in a very funny way. The hospital itself not promoting healthy lifestyle, and the churches, like you're talking about, off the mark in terms of witchcraft and superstition and so on. So these are things that we really have to resolve in society. That I mean, on Sundays, I mean, the kinds of things that, I don't know if you guys show them on your TV too, the kind of religious programs and the interpretations of the Bible that are as crude as you can imagine, and it's still happening, you know. And I read recently that Rwanda
is closing down 6,000 or 60,000 churches.
And that before you even begin to open your mouth to translate the Bible or whatever it is, you need to have gone to a school of theology, so that you are licensed in some way. I think these are the things that will have to happen in this country.
Okay. We are beginning to wrap up. For people, okay, I've been told we've been given a little more time. So how much of a role does religion play in the UK, or it doesn't come at all? It's way off the mark.
Well, you can choose to send your child to a school like a Christian school, but in the government schools, you learn about all the religions. So everybody learns about everything. Everything's celebrated, so that you understand right from Chinese New Year, the dragon going through school, to Eid, to Christmas, everything. So there isn't any, unless, I mean, it could be a government school that's a Christian school or a Catholic school or a school for Muslims. I mean, it could just be, but that would be a choice you would make. It's not sort of, part of everybody's life. And our school is non-denominational, and for some families that's difficult. But then we have Christians and Muslims in the school, so how we would, we don't want to spend all day doing that. I mean, we've got so much education to get on with. So, I mean, that's just the way they do it.
There are Lebanese kids, there are Swiss kids, there are Ghanaian kids in multi-kids.
Yeah, mostly Ghanaian kids. Yeah, and mostly Ghanaian teachers. Where we've had to really reach out a bit more is with the therapy team, because we've just started training speech therapists in Ghana. We've got our first cohort coming out of Legon this year. And once we start capacity building therapists, and that's when we'll see the MDT changing and there being more facilities for schools and teachers who don't really understand how to help these kids. It's very specialized.
No, but there's a question I wanted to ask, if it's okay with you.
Please do.
How did you get interested in what you do? What's your motivation? from the beginning?
Yeah, somebody asked me that question. Okay, well, like I said, I'm a trumpet player, a musician, and I trained to be a teacher a long time ago in the 70s, which shows my grand age. Didn't teach for a long time because I was playing music, doing theatre, film, and all those things. But then I was invited into a school to teach music, and it was a special school. And I didn't want to be a teacher, actually. But I loved working with these kids, and I'd come to Ghana, as I said, in 89, I'd learned to drum, use the drums, brought drums in, and, etc. So I think I was inspired by the kids. They taught me music, they taught me songs, and there's this amazing song, which if it wasn't television, I'd play for you and sing for you. But it was a song that this group of autistic boys made up. And I used that song in all my work over the years, and the kids always love it because it came from kids. So I was inspired by them.
So what kind of emotions are evoked in you, Farouk, when you look at a crippled child struggle for 30 minutes to cover what little distance a bubbly child would do in a few seconds? What does it evoke in you?
We make issues out of it. We make issues out of it. I mean, it's not a race. Life is not a race, is it? So long as that particular student is able to get where he's going to and accesses whatever services are available to him like everybody else, that's fine. Where I get my emotions is when you see the little incremental achievements of each student. When the student comes to you in the first term and the mom says, I've had enough. There's nowhere else to take this my son. And after 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, the mom comes back and says, what have you done to my son? So that gives you the strength to go. Because every student is different. Every single day is different for every student. So you see how complicated it is. Every student is different, every day is different, every day is different for every student. So you go in every day and you have to work with the students according to quote unquote their moods. But the progression that they make over a period of time, we can give you so many examples. We've got students, I mean, I got my daughter in there. My daughter was in London. Typical learner, no disabilities. I said, come and join me here for 1 year and see how it's going. She came. She was very angry the first 2-3 weeks because she wanted to go back. She got 4 O levels in 6 months. She came in January. By July, she had finished her exam. She sends me text every time. This is the best thing you've ever done for me, because the confidence is there. People get to know that everybody is different, but at the same time, everybody has got the same ambitions. Everybody is capable of achieving those ambitions. So those are the things that make me feel motivated to carry on. I mean, the last time I went to the UK, 2 years ago, I went to the UK, and I got onto a bus. And I started to go to the bus and say, going to, you know, you can use Oyster card. But I didn't know. I mean, I had forgotten that you were using Oyster card, so I took some change out of my pocket to pay. And the guy says, no, you don't pay with money. You pay with go and get Oyster card. Oh, sir, are you the one? Oh, hi, how are you? Oh, my name is Mohammed. You don't remember me? Blah blah blah. He was one of the people who have physical disabilities, but now he drives a bus. The bus has modified for him. So for me, that was a huge achievement. Wow, I contributed to this guy's success.
Yeah.
And so why would you want to stop doing that? you are rich in that respect. And so that's what motivates me to.
Fantastic.
Anis, I would ask you this pinpointed question. I know in Ghana, when your wife is delivered of a child, we say a bouncing baby boy or a bouncing baby girl. Paint a picture for us. Would you be able to cope with a baby born with disabilities as a father, or you already have one?
You know, that is the question. That question is pinpointed exactly like you said. You know, it comes as a shock. I mean, I haven't experienced it, but I can imagine, you know, where there's a huge enthusiasm for a new birth. Some want to add to your lineage, and suddenly there's that. You know, but I would imagine that these days with technology, they can even be able to predict the condition of the babies before they come out.
Is that possible?
Well, with Down syndrome,
Down syndrome, yes.
Yeah.
And certain conditions. But as I said, with cerebral palsy, you could have a difficult birth, and poor maternal health care in this country causes some disabilities because of there not being enough care in the actual delivery of the child. So yeah, I mean, it's always a risk, I suppose.
I guess most, what people try to, based on this question, people go through the process of bereavement. First is shock, then it's denial, then it's why me, then it goes through the whole process, then eventually where you want the person to get to is acceptance. And then deal with it. So how do I deal with it? And then to deal with it is another problem, because where are the support mechanisms to help you to deal with it?
Now he's answered your question.
So that's the difficulty. Everybody goes through that process of bereavement, shock, denial, then final acceptance. But even when you get the acceptance, then you start thinking about, okay, I have accepted as a parent. Has society accepted?
Right.
Has the community accepted? Has my own family accepted? And that becomes
if your wife, has your husband accepted?
Yes.
And we have many single mums here with child disability, because the men leave them because they see them as cursed women. But I think if the families get support, it really takes such a huge burden off their shoulders. And I was going to add that I think for many of the families that we work with, they wouldn't change their child for anything.
No, they wouldn't.
You know, whether it's a typical learner with dyslexia or a child with really multiple disabilities, they wouldn't change their child because they found their relationship with their child, and you know.
So the bond is there.
Yeah, and I think that the support is so key. And yes, we need the support from government, we need support from corporate social responsibility, but you know, education is really, really key, isn't it? You know, these families with children who have high needs, they can't go to school. They're not in school anywhere. You know, there's just nothing for them.
And that's why our inclusive education policy, I think everybody must come on board and try to implement it. It is key that we try to implement the education policy.
Okay, in closing, Anis, I'll take your final words. And Anis, you've been making a lot of money off the back of government, doing a lot of consulting in the area of education.
I've never consulted for government. I work with private schools.
Yeah, I know you consulted for a certain school. They told me. You made some good big bucks. In your summits and conferences, I don't know whether you can be chipping in some of these, because maybe the education minister has actually not had time to appreciate what.
Normally, it's organizations like yours. When they are out in public, educating the public and so on, normally they will invite me as a keynote speaker in some capacity.
Policymakers don't engage you, then it's a shame.
No, I haven't done any work with. I've done work for 21st century tertiary education and that sort of thing, but I've not done any work as far as disabilities and that sort of thing. And also, frankly, I've never consulted for a government. I remember when I first came from the US, where I was doing a GATE program, Gifted and Talented Education. I did some work for Accra Metro schools. I think there are about 7 metro schools and so on. That was about 1995, 96. That's the extent of it. You know, and then
are you not reaching out enough?
You know, I have a column that comes on every Monday. So a lot of referrals come that way because I tend to address particular issues, and I come a program like yours, radio, TV, and so on. But normally now, I've come to a point where now when people need me, they will call me, you know. But I've never been. It's lately, to be honest with you, where these issues are coming up as far as disabilities and so on. And there are people who are very committed to it. In fact, the last program that we did somewhere in East Legon, they had invited Reverend Campbell, who's a Catholic priest, you know, because we're talking about their responsibilities and so on, so that we look at how we go forward as a society, you know, and how, like you said earlier, stakeholders, everyone has to function and so on. But like you said, the churches have a lot. The good churches can do quite a bit, except those who are collecting tithe in the name of you know who, and you know, and somewhere along the line, those have to be addressed as well.
Okay, I'll start with you Monday. For people who don't know the role Multi-Kids Inclusive Academy has been playing within the educational sector, would you look into the cameras and tell people what you do and the kind of deficit you are trying to address within our educational setting.
Multi-Kids has its vision on inclusive education, on developing a culture of inclusion where every child can be part of the system. Every child is appreciated and respected for who they are, what they can do. And our journey is to give the child the tools to be successful. And in our school, we have typical learners. We have learners who have got a specific learning challenge, like dyslexia or attention deficit. We have children with mild to moderate needs, and we have children with high needs who are in wheelchairs and who aren't able to speak. I think that we're passionate about implementing Ghana's inclusive education policy. We're passionate about those kids who've been abandoned, that are institutionalized in inappropriate places. We work with these children, so we're not just a small private school. We have a huge part of our school which has got a community element, and we have an outreach program. Inclusive Education Africa is our foundation. We have a program called Multi-Kids Africa, which Farouk heads, which is about taking good inclusive practice, teaching practice across Africa.
And finally, Farouk, what is the selling point for Multi-Kids Africa, since you heard that?
Oh, wow. I mean, our training model is based on the model of Multi-Kids Inclusive Academy, which is we've been modeling for 8 years. We've done all the practice. We know how it works. We are now in a position where we want to share that good practice with other institutions. So if you look at the kind of training we give training on inclusion for teachers, for leaders, and for people. The multidisciplinary team will also provide training in that respect. So for me, it is the selling point is that we have done the practicals. We have done it, we have tried it, we have tested it, and we know it's good, and now we want to share it with other people.
Okay, thank you so much. We've had in the studios, to my immediate left, Mr. Farouk Eliasso, head of Multi-Kids Africa. Sir, thank you so much for making time. The kids are appreciated.
Thanks for having us.
And then Mrs. Mandy Badge, who's been in Ghana for quite some time. Thank you so much, Mommy.
Thank you.
For making time.
Thank you.
And then Anis Haftar. Anis Hafar. Thank you so much for making
All the best, bro. Keep it up.
Keep it up. And so we come your way tomorrow with another edition of Time with Irbad Ibrahim. Stay blessed and keep praying for Ghana. Good night.
Okay.